guys, and welcome to the PPUK Podcast. I'm here with Lee.
Hi.
And Chopin.
Hiya.
And we have an incredible special guest with us today. So our podcast is going to be a little bit different from normal. Normally we'd be talking about an album, but today we're going to talk about a specific area of Prince's career, and that is his fashion and the whole visual of Prince. So to help us take a deep dive into this, we have the incredible author of, let me get this right, On His Royal Badness, The Life and Legacy of Prince's Fashion. And when I say this girl knows fashion, this girl knows fashion. We're talking a BA honours in fashion design, MA in fashion bodywear, and MLit in dress and textile histories. And he's currently doing a PhD in Prince fashion and its effect on the fan base, which is incredible. So let me give a little round of applause for the incredible Casci
Great
Ritchie.
introduction.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for welcoming me onto the podcast. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for my wonderful introduction. I'm going to slip you a little 20 under the table.
Thanks. I'll expect that in my Christmas card. But we are so excited to have you on today, and for us to be able to take a little bit of a different approach from the rest of our podcasts. And I know, Chopin, you're as excited as I am about this one.
Oh, absolutely. For me, the liberating nature of Prince is as much in his image as it is in his music. So for this is close to the heart one.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I know my specialism isn't necessarily in fashion. It's more on the hair and makeup side, but it is an all-encompassing kind of visual, and it's Prince that made me do what I do in his visual. So I'm really excited to talk about this one. Lee, I think you're more on the music side.
Yeah, but I see the importance of this, especially to the fan community. And I think, the thing about these podcasts is, it's to educate, it's to inform, but also to share different aspects of Prince and the community. And, his, fashion is iconic, and, to learn more about that. And, I think it would be great for the podcast. So I'm looking forward to this, and I have a few questions. So yeah, go for it.
Casci, I'm really curious to know, where did your love of Prince come from? What drew you in to Prince? What was your introduction to him? And where did the fascination come from?
I was really lucky that my mum and dad both had excellent taste in music. So when I was growing up, Prince was always there in some way, shape or form. So, I would see the Love Sexy cassette on the table and be like, who the hell's that? And I was really in particular fascinated with the text on the back with, the symbols and that pastel writing. It just really struck me. And, whenever I went to go and pick my mum up from work, she worked really long hours, and so did my dad. And we used to always listen to the Hits album in the car. And I have a really vivid memory of listening to Peach in the car and singing along to the lyrics about, the titties bouncing, and my mum being like, Michael, to my dad, don't let her sing those lyrics. So yeah, he's just always, I say it all the time, but Prince has always been a constant in my life. And as I grew up and I started to learn more about myself and become more expressive with my clothes. And we were speaking before we started this podcast about film noir. I got into film noir in old Hollywood when I was about 14. And it was at that time that I saw Purple Rain as well. I hadn't seen Purple Rain before. And I was like, oh, my mum and dad never told me about this. I wonder why. Because, that Computer Blue live performance, I was like, oh, okay. It pricked my attention. But yeah, when I was that age and, I saw the way that, people like Lauren Bacall and Barbara Stanwyck, they were presenting themselves and dressing. And strangely enough, I found a lineage with Prince, I always saw, the Herb Ritts images of Prince and this beautiful creature that was, presented in such a pristine manner and was just the kind of epitome of glamour. And as I grew up, I just like really found myself in charity shops and started to kind of play about with fashion and got into like 80s costume jewellery, cut my hands wearing broken costume jewellery and lace gloves like in Purple Rain. And then when I went to uni to study fashion, he was just always there as well. So yeah, he's just kind of always been there. And I'm really grateful to my mum and my dad in particular for well, having good taste in music. My mum has some humdingers as well, but and music taste wise, but I was just really lucky that they allowed me to kind of discover the kind of weirdness of Prince as well. Like, I'm a bit of a weirdo, and that's what really hooked me on Prince as well. Like he's a complete weirdo, and he celebrates that. And to me, like, I love that celebration of the eccentric. So it's a bit of a roundabout answer. He's just kind of always been there, in the cassette players, and then like followed me to uni, and like in uni, he really helped me make friends as well. Like on the first night that I moved into halls, there was like 13 or 14 of us, and we were all doing fashion or textiles, and we were all like freaking out. I was 17 at the time. You get dumped at uni in these horrible halls, and we were all sitting in somebody's room watching DVDs, and we'd just watched The Notebook for the first time. So we were all completely traumatized and like hyperventilating, crying, and like all this stuff. And then I went into my room and brought out my free disc of Prince DVDs, of Prince films. And I was like, does anybody know who Prince is? And everybody was like, no. And I was like, right. And
good response to The Notebook.
So
you say that, we all know exactly what box set that is as well. We all know that 3 DVD box set with the little sleeve.
Yeah, and I think I've bought that DVD box set about 5 times because I always end up like losing one of the discs or whatever. And in uni, like all my friends would borrow it. Like they never got as far to Graffiti Bridge. Like their threshold was Under the Cherry Moon. But like that night I made all these friends, and like a lot of my friends now from university, we went to go see Prince together. We travelled to London, and they've supported me in everything that I've done, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, like he's just been a constant in my life, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
Amazing. It's really interesting to hear you talk about it, because your story, I feel, relates to my own quite a lot. I don't know if Leah and Chopin, you feel the same.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think with Prince, and I'm sure I've said this before, is he almost plants a seed, creatively with, there's so many creative people in the Prince community, artists, makeup artists, fashion designers. There's definitely, I've always said this, is definitely a link to creativity within the Prince community. And, he plants that seed, and, it shapes people's careers. It shaped my career. There's a lot of people I know shaped his influence, his music, his fashion, his whole persona. It shapes careers. So, her, Casci saying that story, it definitely relates on so many levels.
And as well as careers, I mean, it shapes the kind of boldness was like, even if you're not copying him directly as an aesthetic, like, I mean, there are elements of Prince that I definitely just completely took on, especially when I was a teenager. Like I'd done the whole painting my face one side as Gemini. I wore the lace mask from Computer Blue to school, and all of that kind of stuff. But there was, but he was part of a canon of visual influences, but I think it was the ballsiness of him to kind of to walk in the room like almost alpha male in a pair of high heels and lace bell bottoms, and just to be like, to own it in that way was as much as what the individual fashion was. It was the way that he kind of owned whatever it was. You can make a bad outfit a good outfit if you wear it with enough confidence, and that's one of those things that definitely influenced me. I don't know if everybody else got that way from it. I'm assuming yes.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's that. Oh, sorry, on you go.
No. What I was going to say was there's very, very few bad pictures of Prince in terms of fashion. There's the very, very few bad pictures of him. There's always, iconic. And a lot of his pictures, album covers are definitely iconic. So, go on, Cassi.
Yeah, no, I think that what you're saying about that boldness, and I think that's what I identified with when I was younger, because I just saw this being, and it like opened possibilities of what you could be, how you could present yourself. Because, like I was a very awkward, like overweight teenager that was interested in things that a lot of my friends weren't, like I had, like, thankfully my mum, introduced me to stuff. And so I was kind of like a weird kind of mixed bag of different things that I was interested in. And looking at people like Prince, it kind of gave you permission to be who you want to be. I always think of like Prince and Dita Von Teese perhaps in the same way, and that Prince and Dita, like they curate the life that they want to live, they curate the art, the image, the persona that they want to be, and they build it for themselves. And to me, that's something that I've always really inspired. That's always really inspired me, because I want to live that creative life, and I want to have that liberation, like what Chopin was saying, that liberated way of living and expressing yourself through fashion, through music, through art, and having the balls to do it. Because, like you say, like, I think what's really interesting, every time I speak about people about Prince and fashion, is it the kind of main thing that pops up is, oh, he looked incredible, but only Prince could wear those things, like only, and there's that kind of unique Princeness, like that. When you read about Prince in high school and people remember him walking through the corridors, strutting down, like in bell-bottom jeans and his afro, and there was that thing about him. And I think he's just naturally one of those people that had such a strong sense of self and knew the importance of expressing himself through clothing, and obviously, like utilised that to his advantage, especially in the beginning. But I think, like, when you're growing up and you have that permission, when you see these people and you have that permission, it can be really, really, really impactful on your life. And obviously it has been with, like with us guys when we're chatting about it. So yeah, it's really important stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember my experience of expression fashion, because I was the youngest of four. I had two older brothers. A lot of it was basically hand-me-down clothes. So I didn't really express myself in any like fashion way. It was kind of all in dancing or on the way I acted. But when I finally got to kind of express myself through clothes, it was quite the, like Prince was very much the forefront. I started by trying to copy him, and I realized quite quickly that didn't work, because my frame wasn't Prince's frame. High-waisted trousers wasn't gonna, look so good on a chubby guy as they were on like Prince's very V frame. But I could take the bits that I could. Like, this is why I went out with the mask or the hats, or there was even one where, do you remember in Love Sexy, there's this fantastic outfit on the Love Sexy tour, which is like kind of like white tights, black shorts, and then like suspenders down to the belts. Suspender belts down to the boots.
Yeah,
I got a pair of like my dad's old braces and attached them to the bottom of my army boots, and then pulled them up to like the lapels, like the epaulets of like a kind of like pilot style kind of work shirt. And that was the way that I could do it. But like, I realized it was the details I could copy, but structurally I was different. So I had to change that. And also other people that I was kind of copying was the kind of the Tom of Finland aesthetic, and also Madonna as well. It was like kind of a combination of Tom of Finland, Madonna, Prince, a little bit of Michael Jackson in this, but not so much once I found Prince. And it was that learning process of juggling those things. And of all those people, I could talk about all of those individual influences separately, but Prince, it was definitely the boldness to do it as a guy. You know, like it became like, I think the reason I didn't go down the drag queen route, because I could quite easily go in that kind of like, presentational kind of makeup and clothes and stuff like that, is because I had someone like Prince who was like, you can do it without adjusting your own body. Just use your own silhouette to create an impact. And it took a little bit of learning, as it does when you're a teenager, because there's always awkward years and stuff. But I think I agree. Like, I definitely agree with you on that one, Cassie. It was just like, you see that and it's emboldening. And that starts the process of the work.
I agree. I mean, for me, it was slightly different. You had the the challenge of trying to understand how you're going to take elements of Prince and incorporate it to work with your silhouette. And I had a similar issue with the fact that I'm a woman. So I've always wanted to do kind of a tribute to Dirty Mind. And I'm like, I can't walk out with my knockers out. I can't, that can't, I mean, it could.
I was going to say, I beg to differ, but, I have no friends who have, but.
But it was about, I always took elements, not just from Prince, but always the women around him as well. So I was looking at people like Vanity and Sheila E. and Jill and Third Eye Girl. I was always taking elements of what they did and kind of mixed it with what Prince did. And I've always had a vintage element to what I've worn. So there's always been a little bit of a 40s, 30s sprinkling in there for me, which has kind of just ended up with a huge love of tailoring. So blazers with big shoulders that are beautifully tailored, and high-waisted trousers. I can't wear anything on my hips. I look at people wearing hipsters and I'm like, how? My brain doesn't even compute, because from such a young age, I've been obsessed with Prince, and it's always been about the high-waisted. It was always sitting above the hips, apart from Parade, of course.
Yeah.
Just to throw that in there. So it has really, really affected how I dress. And I don't think about it consciously anymore. I will go out and wear something, and I'll be out with my partner, or I'll see friends that are Prince fans, and they'll be like, oh, this is very Prince. And I'm like, oh, is it? I didn't try. Sometimes it would just be like layering pearls and layering chains and the way I accessorize. So I could wear something that's not remotely Prince. Like, if you looked at it as an outfit, it wouldn't be Prince, but the way that I over accessorize it naturally now kind of adds that little Prince seasoning on top. But it is definitely a learning process. And I think because he took so many elements from so many different places, when you're trying to find your own style and you're taking influence from someone taking it from so many places, I feel like it is a real journey that you go on. I went through a goth stage. I went through an 80s vintage stage. I just went through Prince replicating stage. And it's kind of now at the point where my own natural style is just kind of just affected by all these different areas.
That is something, when you said that you had the vintage phase, because I was obviously going through the army surplus stores to create some of these looks, like to kind of accessorize it that way.
Yeah,
kind of put these accessories on like a hyper masculine. I wasn't consciously doing that. I now know that's what I was doing, but I was taking like the hyper masculine frame and then kind of feminizing it with accent, like with accessories and stuff. I just wondered, did everybody find they had to go to the vintage or the used store because the shops just weren't cutting it in terms of personal expression? Because it's hard to look if you're just buying off the rack, unless you know how to customize and sew. How do you kind of embolden something that's just on the rack?
But isn't this the case though? Like both you and Leah have said, and even Cassie, is you're using Prince to describe a look. So he was that unique that it was like, oh, the princeness or the prince look. It's like he defined himself was his own description, if that makes sense.
I think there's always an authenticity to Prince, that kind of like USP of princeness.
Yeah, princeness.
And I think like what we all identify with is that kind of, you know, like the messy bit at the beginning of his career, where, you know, like he's rooting about in, you know, like the army surplus stores, secondhand stores. He's borrowing makeup and, you know, like jewelry from female family members. He's completely ripping off Des Dickerson and Andre Simone, and he's getting, you know, like his girlfriends to stitch up costumes for his band, like when they were in high school. Like that, like element of like bricolage and, you know, like bringing everything in. Like we're all multi-dimensional people, and I think like that kind of rawness and the messiness of Prince does stay throughout his career. It becomes refined, and it you know, like he you know, like solidifies it into this silhouette that I say, like he's got like his Prince loungewear, and then he's got his unconventional tailoring. That's his like two go-tos. But that kind of like playfulness and experimentation is something that we can all relate to, and it's whenever I speak to people that are, you know, like creative minded as well, and they speak about Prince and fashion, that's always something that they really cling on to, those early years. Like, you know, like I think 1979 is such a fantastic year of Prince's fashion. People ridicule it, but it's so interesting because you see the way his mind work. It would be the same looking at a picture of us when we were 15 or 16 and we've shoved on everything from the British Heart Foundation and trying to make it work. But it's like that, you know, like coming of age and coming into your own style. And we've probably all had it ourselves. We're all like, you know, like we all express ourselves through clothing to different varying degrees. But we all do that, and we've all had that within us from the get-go, you know, that way, and we're just polishing it. And I think with Prince, that kind of messy area is a really, really interesting thing to look at, and I think it really excites fans because. So I always think of Prince as unattainable. You know, like wearing these, you know, like couture outfits and things that are tailor-made to him. And yes, there's that side of him, but all throughout his career, he wears off the rack, he borrows clothes from people, and there's this kind of like relatability that I find through Prince's fashion, which is weird because when I first started, I was just really, really interested in finding out more about the costume designers and that side of things, because it's never talked about. When you read about performers on stage, the people behind it get glossed over, and it's not right, and it's something that I'm really passionate about.
Absolutely.
But the more like it's even like when we're talking about Madonna and stuff, like it just gets glossed over, and there's no real kind of analysis or thought behind why they wear the things that they do. And when you're particularly speaking about stage costuming, it's an art form, and it's something that's integral to the artist performing their art. But anyway, I digress.
I think that's a really interesting point in that it's an art form in itself. And when you go to see exhibitions like My Name is Prince, there was an interesting realization I came to while I was looking at the stuff, and I just look at, the outfits are exciting, but the polish comes around, you know, like Helen Hyatt, Stacia Lang, those people. There's a level of tailoring that just kind of like elevates, and then that stage clothes become fashion stage clothes, and they become merged. Whereas before, like the kind of is it Mary France who does all of the Purple Rain era stuff? I mean, they're beautiful clothes, and the Under the Cherry Moon stuff, they're beautiful clothes, but they're, you know, if you've spent any time in a theater, they're very much made to be worn on stage, very light, they move. And there's something that happens just around like the kind of cashmere love sexy jackets that are kind of, I think, Helen Hyatt and the leather jackets from like Graffiti Bridge, and then into Stacia Lang, where it becomes really structured, but still like tropical weight suit fabric, so it becomes still breathable and movable, and then it loosens up again with like early era Debbie McGuinn? And again, and it's like this, but within all of those people, like there's this curve that that they all kind of do, and it's very much as it is Prince deciding to get those people, or saying approving these designs, those designs do come from those designers. You know, there's Mary France has a signature, Helen Hyatt has a signature, Stacia Lang has a signature, and Debbie McGuinn has a signature. So there's a very, you know, as much as band members changing, those people around Prince in the costume department and in the clothing department, especially somebody that wears basically costuming on a day-to-day basis, you know, anything that's made for stage is also worn for a rehearsal or worn for a studio. You know, they end up being practical clothes. And I think you're absolutely right. These names need to be up there in my book with Wendy and Lisa. They need to be up there with Tony M and Sonny T in the importance of the journey on Mr. Hayes, because Prince is such a multifaceted career and he's important on so many levels. Business, art, you know, like visuals, clothes, and music, that we get quite focused on the band members a lot of the time, and those people do deserve their credit. But I think, yeah, those seamstresses and those designers really do too.
Yeah, I think what you were when you're talking about as well, that difference between stage garment and then it turns into clothes is really interesting as well. And that's something that I'm looking at into my PhD. The fact that, you know, like we view all these, we look at the Raspberry Beret suit and we're like, wow, this iconic garment, or, you know, like the fur dye girl, you know, like tunics that he wore. And then we see images of them in Paisley Park on a rack of clothes, and they're half fallen off their hanger, and they're crumpled and they're worn, and they're like, to Prince, obviously these garments are just his clothes. That's just the way that he, you know, like it's so intrinsic to who he is. It's just so there's that kind of like ickiness that I need to get into. But I think as well, it's important what you're saying as well about the stage element of the clothing, and that turn of, you know, like with Helen Hyatt and Stacia Lang. I think as well, a lot of that comes from them being from the theatre background. So like before, like Marie France is a costume designer. She like her role is to make the clothes like film, you know, like look amazing on films. And, you know, like when she came into Purple Rain, she had to, you know, like basically redraft a lot of the stuff and reproduce it in fabrics that were actually going to photograph and look okay under camera lights, in comparison to what, you know, like Louis Wells and Von Terry were doing, which was like a kind of blend of, they were working with, you know, like Earth, Wind and Fire. And so they were on the road anyway. They were making performance ready clothes, but they weren't, you know, like there was that kind of like disconnect, not like a bad disconnect, but, you know, like different clothes for different roles for a performer. Yeah. And I think as well, like these people are really, really, these creatives are so important to that. You were talking earlier about like Prince's silhouette, and obviously Prince is working, you know, like he's like the perfect person for a tailor, you know, like he's got proportions that aren't kind of, you know, like I say normal loosely, you know, like your stereotypical, what is stereotypical proportions? They don't exist. But, you know, like Prince is the best person for, you know, like he's the customer that a tailor's looking for.
He's got that upside down pyramid, like, of the broad shoulders and hyper thin waist. That's kind of,
and that kind of leanness as well that people like Von Terry like really amplified with the kind of 1999 and moving forward to Purple Rain. They were the people that actually amped it up and made him more of a presence on stage. You know, like when you look at all the, you know, like the smoke shows, is that what, you know, like the smoke screens and all the lighting, and, you know, like in Purple Rain, the silhouette work and everything that he carries on for so many years. That is so like iconic and it's so strong on screen because of the way that they have built up his body through tailoring. So it is, and, you know, like with Stacia Lang, like that scroll work and ornate detailing that she brings into it, it's just, I know Chopin, she's
I can do a whole thing on that.
I know, but like these people are so important to Prince's story, and not just, you know, like working with Prince, them as creatives as well. They're just incredible. One person, and I always kind of put it out when I speak to people, is that I would love to speak to somebody who knew Jim Sheeran, who worked with Helen Hyatt in the mid 80s and kind of late 80s and early 90s with Prince. He was the tailor, and he came from a theatre background as well. And from my kind of interest point, I'm really interested in the pattern aspect of it, the pattern making. And I think that Jim Sheeran passed, I believe it was like late 90s or early 2000s. And there's there's nothing written about him other than, you know, like he worked with Prince. And from my understanding, he was really, really integral, along with Von Terry and Louis Wells and Sylvia Simone as well, you know, like creating the first trench coats and things. But if anybody knows, because I want to tell these stories, and I want people to, like you say, Chopin, that vocabulary of, you know, like Helen Hyatt and Debbie McGuan, like they should be in our vocabulary just as much as you know, like the Game Boys, and you like all do you know what I mean? It's so important.
I think PPUK might have to put a little bit of a campaign.
Yeah. Oh, we can do that. We can do that.
Well,
Please.
I didn't even think about it before, but when you say that, like around End of Controversy, 1999 tour, they start to work on his silhouette. That's where the stage shows start to have backlighting.
Yeah.
Like the silhouette in backlighting that's, you know, at the start of the show with the pulsing light. And it's interesting that I never really put the two together, because Dirty Mind, you know, it's just a couple of spotlights and he comes on stage, you know, looking like Dirty Mind Prince. But that backlighting with the big reveal and relying on the silhouette before any other detail, those clothes change the stage show and the way he starts shows. I mean, look at the way he starts Diamonds and Pearls with that, which to me is one of, when I think of Prince, I think of that hands out, almost kind of like Jesus pose at the start of Diamonds and Pearls, where he's got his arms stretched out. There's a cloud guitar down there. His hair's up in the typhoon, and he's in the Stacia Lang Kiss Curl jacket, but you don't know that until the lights come on. But that to me, like a lot of people think of Purple Rain Prince, but that to me, when you say the word Prince, that's the image that comes to mind, and it is a direct, as much as that is very uniquely stationary in a lot of those details, it still does throw back to that Controversy 1999 backlit entrance to the show.
It's building the mystery, which later on ended up being such an integral part of his persona and his stage presence. And to think that just the fact that his silhouette had changed because of his clothes, and that's what kind of seems to have initiated a lot of that.
I agree. I think iconically, though, each era has its own silhouette that is very iconic. Even to the later years, he embraced the afro and the silhouette of the afro. I was looking at an image today, and it was one of the shows, and it's almost an outline of him, the afro, and he's holding up the cane. And it's like each era if you played a game of like silhouettes and put Prince each silhouette, you would be able to name the error because it's so iconic. You know, and we'll probably set that up as a game now of like, oh, which error is this? You know, but it's, you know, you know which error it is because it's so, just with silhouette, you know when it is.
One thing I actually wanted to ask you about, Casci, and that is one of the things that did seem to defy kind of different eras with Prince, and that was his tunic and trouser combo. It's one of the things that we do see from Rave all the way through to Third Eye Girl, and it just seemed to be something that he really latched onto and used in so many different textures, styles, contexts. Do you know or have any theories why particularly he jumped on that particular one and held on to it maybe a little bit longer than the rest of his silhouettes?
I think that silhouette is one of the most kind of important parts of Prince's kind of sartorial legacy. I kind of refer it in my head as like Prince loungewear. Like, you know, like that's where he's most comfortable. I think well, you know, like I'm speaking on his behalf, but you know, like when Prince is in suits, he doesn't look uncomfortable, but the loungewear, it to me, it looks effortless, and there's this effortless, you know, like glamour performance and chicness that comes with the tunic and the trousers. And I do think that, you know, like it's remained in some way, shape or form throughout all his career, because you see it jump up in like 1979 with the bodywear in terms of the Dan skins and this really, you know, like the tight low neck, and then this, you know, like the slash necks that he wears, and then you know, like Graffiti Bridge, like that's like peak Prince loungewear, you know, like the big baggy top and the unitard and these things. And I think, you know, like when you're talking about Rave, and he was working with Jose Arlenz, who's like an LA-based designer, and I spoke to him. I was really lucky enough to speak to him in the book. And his whole kind of ethos of designing for Prince is that he wanted Prince to be comfortable and to look fabulous on stage. So he was using, you know, like swimwear fabrics. So like, you know, like proper millennium swimwear fabrics that looked like, you know, like the back of the CD. So, you know, like Y2K, very Y2K.
Yeah.
But that kind of tunic and the trousers, like you say, it follows them. And then, you know, like when it comes to piano and microphone tour, it's in its like, you know, like crystallized form, and that, you know, like Prince is an aging man. He's dealing with, you know, like health issues and the issues that we know that we now know that he was having. And I think when you see him in those tunics and in those, there's always a specific way that the garments are cut. They're cut loose to the body, but they're cut tight around the shoulders. They're built up around his shoulders. Some of them have shoulder pads, some of them don't, but they're cut in a way that still gives that, you know, like the really kind of strict shoulder line and drop. And then there's that elegance of like seeing his, you know, like when he's playing the piano and it's just draping. So you can see like I always think Prince has really beautiful, elegant hands. So, you know, like that. And then the bootleg pants, you know, Prince's version of yoga pants are, again, cut that way just so you can see the top of his heel, but you can't see the areas of the heel that are worn. And, you know, like when we look at Prince, like we've all looked at the auction sites and see all these battered up Prince heels, and, you know, like from the work that he's been putting into them, they're a working garment, they're a working object. So the bootleg trousers are cut in a way that you just see a certain height of the heel. You don't get to see the back of the shoe and the areas of you know, like kind of wear and tear that we know Prince was doing in these kind of garments and objects that he was wearing, these accessories. And the bootleg, the bootleg to me is like a kind of extension of what he was wearing as a youngster as well. You know, like Prince was a child he was like a Peacock Revolution child. So he was looking up to Santana and James Brown and these people and Hendrix and all these people. And whilst he was wearing jeans at school and things, that kind of translates into this kind of lucid, languid like he can pull on these trousers. They often, like 9 times out of 10, they didn't have pockets on them. They didn't have labels on them. And they were in these kind of slinky fabrics. So to me, it's like, like Prince's version of loungewear, but it's like when you see it on stage, it's amped up. So there might be like a variation of fabric, or there might be a print, like the fur dye.
Or a gold necklace.
Or yes, like the costume jewelry, the layering of the costume jewelry, that kind of like nod to Versace, and the fact that he was layering up all these kind of jewels and all this stuff, but half of it was from Forever 21, and like it was all just coloured metal. So that, like, I just find all that stuff really interesting. But yeah, like the kind of slinky loungewear is something that I really want to kind of dive into, hopefully, in my PhD. And I mean, it's hard to say where my research will go, but I think there's something really interesting in the way that Prince wore clothing. Like he would sometimes, like without labels, without pockets, the type of fabrics that he was wearing. He was really into soft, like model fabrics. He did, like all this stuff that you can see when you look. I mean, when you look at the parade tours and those trousers and the fabric those trousers are made of, and the crop tops, that never leaves him. It just becomes slightly a bit more refined as he gets older, and like his body changes. So yeah, it's something that I'm really interested in. It's
interesting that when you talk about he accessorizes from places like Forever 21, like he can turn like street store stuff and mix and match it. Is one of my favorite stories is the lime green sweater from Emancipation is actually just a cream one off the rack from Target, and it's like, oh, I have to buy the seamstress is like, I have to buy 10 more because he wants them in every color. Can we dye it? Like will it go green? Does this like and I remember when first seeing that Emancipation image with the snow like a snow jacket and a Target women's jacket and a pair of yoga pants, and the way his hair was cut was very kind of boyish, and it was just so nothing about it said off the rack, but lots of it kind of was, but it was mixed. Because you took from that rack on that side of the store and that rack on that side of the store, and then obviously you have some talented seamstresses who kind of take it in at the waist and here and there. That kind of stuff, that kind of loungewear is weirdly a lot more accessible to you than you think, which goes back to that thing where you think of Prince as this inaccessible thing, but actually he's not. You can do a version of it with like inserting some shoulder pads into the shirt, and
definitely at the moment as well, sites like Pretty Little Thing and Boohoo have so much of these co-ord lounge sets. With COVID, co-ord lounge sets have just become everywhere. So it's really commonplace now on those kind of sites to find like a flared turtleneck with matching trousers that are literally the same cut. Now, whether that's Prince having a little influence there knowingly or not, that's up for debate, but they are accessible now at the moment, which is brilliant because I go out and buy about 5 of them. But Cassi, you mentioned accessories there, so I'm going to jump on that and let you have a little chat with Chopin about the chain hat, because I don't think me and Lee can have any input on this subject. And
I'm a huge fan of the chain hat. There's pictures of me wearing it somewhere online.
I think there's not a single person that's been to one of the London Weekenders who hasn't had a picture in that chain hat. Our DNA is all over it.
I wish
that's true. This is pre-COVID as well. Probably just got COVID from the chain hat.
I gotta say, when I got an actual real one from the ones that they were doing from Paisley Park, I did, as a thank you, gift that one that I made myself to Rosalina, who was, so that particular hat is now in Washington. So
it has a life out. The communal chain hat has moved on.
It weirdly enough, it started life as it was a birthday present from my brother, because when I was like a teenager, I would try and recreate the chain hat with paper clips. Okay, so like to chain round, and I was trying to do
or it didn't happen.
Unfortunately, my family didn't think back then. Photos weren't as ubiquitous, and I did try and make the Violet the Organ Grinder top in paper clips because I couldn't afford the chains as well. But I got like kind of like one arm and the top, but I didn't have enough paper clips. But now I've got a real gold chain hat, so that was amazing. But to me, that was that Violet the Organ. I was so happy to see that there was a chapter on the gold chain hat and the kind of My Name is Prince outfit, because to me, more so now the My Name is Prince outfit could have its own PhD. But before that, I always thought the Violet the Organ Grinder outfit in itself is basically a head-to-toe transformation from masculinity to femininity in fashion in one body. And I just thought that in itself, and I don't think it was conscious. I think it was the most amazing piece of like instinctual costuming, and that came from him. I was just interested why, when you got this whole wealth of Prince iconography to choose from, what to you stuck out about the gold chain hat?
I think for me, it's that iconic silhouette, and it's that kind of link to, like you were mentioning before, Tom of Finland. When I see the chain hat, I think of Betty Page and Irving Klaw and this kind of, like the 1950s fetish stuff that I am interested in myself. And I know that Prince was interested in it as well. And there's this kind of, like you say, like particularly in Violet the Organ Grinder, I completely agree with you in the fact that it was a transformation. And to me, it becomes almost like a genderless being. Prince just is sex in that song. It doesn't, like he doesn't necessarily specify. Like he talks about your brassiere and stuff, but you don't know if it's a man or a woman. And his main kind of purpose in life is to grind all the live long days. So he needs this kind of workwear that allows him to do this. And I think that music video to me is just like, it's just absolute utter perfection. And I found it really difficult to write about it because, probably like you, Chopin, it just makes me like fizz with such joy. It's just such a, as you mentioned, Chopin, it's just a perfect pairing of song and costume. And then, like it finds a life in My Name is Prince, and it changes, like the chain hat then changes into something else, into another type of power and another assertiveness and control, and that is different to Violet, distinctly different to Violet. But also as well, when you were talking about making your hat with the paper clips, I can just imagine a tiny Chopin going into, like W.H. Smith, buying out all the paper clips. Just all your pocket money of paper clips. But these stories, like, they bring me such joy because, I know Lee did it as well. Like, like I did that when I was younger as well. And, hoarding lots of Marks and Spencer's nylon 90s and teddies, trying to be like Vanity. Never going to happen.
But this is it, though, within the Prince community, a lot of people, even at parties now, like when we went to Birmingham, they duplicate the looks. People, cosplay the looks. They're incredibly popular, and some people have pulled off some great looks over the years of replicating his look. And
I remember one of Leah did a fantastic one of the Beautiful Night look with the jean jacket, kind of sign of the times at one of the parties with the P cap. That was fantastic. That
was hours of hand painting on bleach onto denim.
But there's even groups on Facebook now that people share their looks and replicated looks on, of what they've created from from Prince's looks. Cassie, I had a question for you. I don't know if you've covered it at all. Is what I think is also unique, and I don't know if it's mentioned a lot, is Prince embracing fan art and wearing fan art on T-shirts, like Third Eye Boy. I think I'm not sure if he wore some of Martin's stuff, but I remember a lot of Third Eye Boy stuff that he wore, and he embraced fan art on album covers and also in his fashion. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I didn't mention this in my book, but this is a kind of big area that I'm looking into for my PhD, because I'm really interested in that relationship between Prince and fandom, and like you say, like that that kind of reverence and like at times kind of tricky relationship with fan art and fandom, but he did respect it. Coco and Breezy, like he could have asked them, like the third eye the glasses are mine. Yeah, you can't sell them to anyone. But instead he allowed, not that he allowed, but that way, like he was like, no, by all means, sell these. Anyone can wear them. And I think that in wearing, like fan art and kind of, I think Prince was how do I put it? Like I think Prince had a real eye for creativity and art, and obviously he did. But I think he really, really relished when he saw somebody doing their own thing. And I think that's when you see, like when he picks up on specific looks and specific illustrations and then go on to, get blown up into album art and things like that, that he really, really respected people that were doing their own thing.
Yes.
And I think as well, it's like he really used clothing and costuming and that side of things to communicate to his fans as well. So, like all the, like the 3121 jacket that he wore before the album was released, and, like the, like wearing literally Minneapolis on his sleeve. Like he was asking people to come to the Purple Rain tours wearing purple, and that was before,
wear something purple.
Yeah, like and like there's images. Yeah, there's images of like the night. I think it's called it's at the very beginning of the 1999 tour, and it's in Detroit. And Prince is performing, and he's jumping out into the crowd, and there's a sea of young black men all wearing the trench coat, and they've got the Rude Boy pin on. So that kind of like visual replication was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think like when he made, like we were speaking of earlier about the Emancipation and the bird jacket, like he made that accessible for fans. It was a higher price item, but he wanted fans to wear, like he wasn't precious about his clothes. Does that make sense? Sometimes you find with designers, with performers, they want a certain thing for themselves. They don't want it to be mass marketed and things like that. But on certain occasions, not all occasions, he was very generous with, like letting his fans into that little bit of accessible Prince-ness. That's a really, really interesting question, and it's something that I will hopefully spend the next 3 years.
I've always thought that, in his later years, I thought him embracing fan art and wearing fan art, I've not seen that with any other artist. And, and he realised, I think, over the years, the importance of community. And like you said, with like the MPG stuff and all of that, he saw it, his fan group, as a community, and that it's an important brand, and to feel part of that community, you would wear the clothing. I remember, going to the tours and stuff, and everyone was buying the merchandise because they wanted to wear it in the crowd, because it's that sense of community and using fashion as a statement of being part of a community. And that's, and I still think it's incredibly important.
With that sense of community, I wanted to talk to you, Casci, a little bit about the community Prince created essentially with his band, with all the bands running through, and particularly how he dressed women around him. I'm hugely passionate and a champion of Prince's women. You get some people in the community, they're a little bit shady with the Prince girls. I'm a huge champion for all of the women that Prince worked with. But the way they dressed was always very united with him. So I don't think you mention it within the book, but I was just wanting to know what your thoughts are around Prince dressing women and bandmates.
I think again, that's a really, really amazing question as well. And it's something that I'm writing something about it in terms of Love Sexy. But I think that Prince dressed women as a mirror of himself. Like it's Wendy and Lisa in particular, like Wendy specifically, there's that real mirror image. It gets a little bit. It's hard to say, because when you hear the women talking about the clothes that Prince was asking them to wear, they all say they're more or less quite happy to wear them. There is instances, like in the 90s and stuff, and like specific garments and that type of thing. But I think Prince knew the importance of stage wear and that kind of cohesive look. I think as well, I think it was all about, if they look good, it made him look good. I know that sounds bad, but we know what Prince was like. He could look better in any of the outfits that they were. Do you know what I mean? Like, because he just had that thing about him. I think I think there's a really interesting thing that needs to be like discussed and delved more about that mirroring of Prince within women and the women in Prince's life and in Prince's creative life as well. Like particularly when you're like talking about, like like Vanity 6 and the lyrics of Vanity 6 and Prince writing these lyrics and talking about, like wearing his camisole and all these really specific details that, like are like to the, again, like the kind of atypical heteronormative male isn't going to have that much of a kind of connection to a particular heel or a camisole or a particular way like, like a fabric falls on the body or feels against the body. But Prince had that within him. He had that kind of vocabulary. And I think, and particularly in the 80s, and Maite as well, like the way that he dressed Maite, like it's just, Maite's costumes in the 90s are like an absolute scream. They're so much fun.
What I love about Maite in particular is there was this real change in that all the women that he was dressed in prior to Maite, they were always hyper feminine. They were so feminine a lot of the time. There's a little bit of a change with the Purple Rain, but when you look at Love Sexy, they are very feminine, very sexy. Maite's outfits were extraordinarily sexy, but he started putting her in like Doc Martens and the big hats. This kind of masculinity came into the way she dressed, and it added to her own femininity. So I love that there was like this switch up with Maite compared to past women he'd dressed.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of reflective of the kind of the style at the time as well, like that kind of, like blossom fashion and, like the big baggy grunge wear along with like, like the panty or the crop top and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think Maite's clothes worked in particular so well because she was grounded within belly dance and her garments were designed for that, to show off, like her skill in dancing. I spoke to her very briefly about it in Celebration in 2018. So Maite just kind of echoed what I had suggested, like it was echoing the clothing allowed her to dance and to look the best she could. And it made her dancing even more fantastical because, like the embellishments and the way the garments were cut and the fabric, they moved with her body and the rhythm of her body. I think that is, like Lee, it's a really, really important thing to think about, the way that he positioned women in his band and the way that he was dressing them, and that kind of mirroring, but also is it a way of him, like, you know, like there is an element of fetishizing women to a certain degree, and him dressing particularly mighty, because it did become quite overtly sexual at a point. But whenever Mighty speaks about it, she does always speak about it fondly. I think with Third Eye Girl, I think he like hit the nail on the head there, because it allowed the band to dress. It allowed the band to have their own kind of, you know, like their own persona, their own character, and the clothing worked with the music that they were playing, and there was that freedom of movement and things. But I do think it's really interesting. I think it's something that I wish more people would look into, that like Camille and all these things. That was Prince havering on about camisoles for like 2 or 3 years in the 80s because he wanted to wear one, or was it because he fetishized the women in them, or like, you know, like the way that he dressed Susan Moonsey as well? Like there's a lot to unpack, but it's very interesting, and I would love to speak to the women that wore these clothes. I know that Kat found it quite difficult, the skimpy costumes, and, you know, like she came in with her own style, and she influenced Sign of the Times style and the dance, and, you know, we know all the stuff. But I think all the women do come in, you know, like vanity is so important to contemporary fashion today. Like, you cannot look at Beyonce or Rihanna or any of these performers. That started with vanity, like, and I would love to know more about that relationship between vanity and Prince and the way that he dressed. I know that, you know, like with Susan and Jill. Oh my God,
Jill Jones.
Jill Jones, and oh my God, I've totally forgotten Vanity 6. Brenda. Brenda's my favourite as well. Limousine is my absolute jam.
Leah, let's not talk about Nasty Girl.
But,
that's my jam.
But I know that they had a bit of a kind of contentious, or Prince is putting us in these teddies and these stockings and camisoles, but I think with a lot of, you know, like wearing the blazers and the tuxedo jackets and that kind of, like you say, the masculinity of almost, you know, like borrowing your lover's jacket to cover up when you're going out for a pint of milk. I think a lot of that, I feel like that is so much. There's so much Denise in there, like, yeah. But yeah, it's another tangent that I would love to go down.
I think some of the things you touched on there, like, I find ones that I find really fascinating myself, with the as much as he told women what to wear, he would take their clothes and alter it for himself. And it's that kind of, am I putting this in your wardrobe because actually I want it myself? And especially when he done the Oprah interview where he's just like, well, I'm a new person now, and I don't know what gender that person is, i.e. the symbol. And, you know, not to extrapolate too much from it, but the fact that you would even consider that, or even say that out loud, you know, and we know how much how controlled he is about the information about himself that goes out. That's a very key message about, you know, how much he saw of himself in the people that he dated, and how much, you know, in that mirroring thing, that it's kind of, I mean, today we'd have words like gender fluid, but that term wasn't around then. And I know it's a controversial term for some Prince fans, but unfortunately, all of this visuals are essentially what we would call now gender fluid.
Yeah, you'd say the same about David Bowie as well, wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. Even if you identify as like a binary heterosexual male, how you present, the whole presentation of this, the whole ambiguity of I'm taking my girlfriend's clothes, adjusting them for myself. I'm kind of, suggesting ways in which she looked because actually I want to mirror it within my tailoring and my clothes. That's it's not just simply I'm going to dress you up to look sexy so my mates like you. It's like it's not. I think he got away with a lot of having revealing skimpy women around him in ways that a lot of kind of 80s and 90s guys didn't, because there wasn't anything that those women wouldn't wear that he wouldn't wear himself. And because, like, when you say, like, for one of the better example, David Lee Roth or any number of rockers and rappers, from Guns N' Roses to Snoop Dogg, like they would be these very, kind of masculine presented men surrounded by hundreds of skimpy women, and it would look very kind of exploitative. But when you look at something like,
women were always there for a reason. They had a purpose. They were musicians or they were dancers. There are videos like Insatiable and Violet where there are kind of there as a symbol of sex. But there was always, for me, it never felt for the sake of it, and they never felt like they were put there just because Prince wants to be seen with some girls dressed like that. They always seemed to have some kind of purpose or symbolism for the reason that they were there.
Yeah. And I think what you said, Chopin, as well, like hits the nail on the head, that even, like when you think of emancipation and I see that as kind of like Prince's most like, like heteronormative, like bro-y type look, but he's still wearing lace trousers that are see-through and you can see, like a thong underwear underneath. Like, so there's that subversion of gender norms. And that to me is so natural to Prince's like psyche, if that makes sense. And we can talk about, like gender fluid and these terms that we speak about now, but it's that I don't even know if Prince could talk about it, like if he was still here. But I do think there's something in that, like it was more than just clothes to him. It was more than hair. It was more than makeup. It was a way of expressing himself. And I think, I haven't really mentioned it, but I think like sensuality, we talk about sex, but like sensuality and clothing in Prince is so intrinsic to how he presented himself. The way that he poses his body, the different erogenous zones that he shows off, that he sings about. Like, arguably there are times that it's a bit, like in your face but there's also so many grey areas and spaces that he explores parts of his body and sings about pleasure in his lover in a way that is not in gender norms. It's something that is so intrinsically Prince, and that kind of like bounces back on the clothes that he wears and the way that he wears those clothes as well. Like the hip chain. We could talk about the hip chain for like 4 years, but like that. Like the women, like Leah was saying, like the women weren't just there for props. They were there they were working, they were there to do a job. And I think no matter what the women did wear, I'm thinking about it kind of bigly, they were all wearing garments that, like when we look at Sign of the Times and Love Sexy, those garments were like they were, like traditionally skimpy, high cut and things like that. But the dancing and the performance that Kat and Sheila were doing it was, but the way that he dresses Bonnie and Rosie Gaines is completely different. So there's that there is that disconnect. And I think that's something that we need to think about as well when we think of the women in Prince's life, and the way that, like when he presents Rosie Gaines in diamonds and pearls, and she might be wearing like, like a nod to a basque, and she looks absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
But there is, and you can really see it with Bonnie. There's that disconnect. Bonnie's in like a kind of loose blouse, and she looks completely amazing. But maybe it was because Bonnie wasn't comfortable wearing, like the stuff that the rest of the band were wearing. But I've got a feeling that it was maybe Prince being like, no, this is your costume. This is, and that's something to think about.
It's interesting because when I think about those two people in particular, they very much so almost take on motherly figures in the band.
Yeah.
As opposed to the rest of the women. And when I think about them, I do think of like the mothers.
Yeah. No, there's true. Yeah, and like Mavis Staples, and you know, like he hasn't. I would love to see Mavis Staples in some like form of, like Love Sexy spandex, but I think you're right as well. I think you're right though, thinking of the roles that they do play in Prince's band, but and I think like thinking about the way that Third Girl dress, there isn't a sexualization of Third Girl. It's very much like, like it's a rock star band. It's we're all grungy and we're all here to.
I don't know. I had a small crush on Donna. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, they're all incredibly beautiful. But
I saw him live and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that was fine. I had my moment. Confession time. But going back to your point about Third Eye Girl is that, like you said, their look represented the music and the genres, like, Screwdriver and all that stuff in the performance on SNL and stuff with Mars. That their style, look, everything emphasized the music. And going to the gender fluid comment that Chopin said, always remember the meme of Prince can wear high heels and still your girlfriend. It's that, that joke of his gender fluidness, I guess.
Fluidity.
There we go.
But that's just something, that's kind of a more academic term for what he did instinctually. I mean, it's like, yes. I know a lot of the times on message boards, the minute you talk about words like queer or gender fluid or, androgyny and stuff, there's a kind of high playground like mentality that takes over, that instantly a lot of people think, oh, someone's calling Prince gay again, and then it's just like no, those are separate things. Like you can be, it's an absolutely separate thing. What we're talking, I mean, this is to anybody that's listening that kind of doesn't. There's a lot of terms that I don't expect people to understand or to have heard in their day-to-day life, but the subtleties of, and they are really subtle terms. But basically, what it's saying is, not questioning who he slept with or whether he considered himself a man or not. Those are quite clear answered questions. But the way he presented himself is coded. He's aware of it. He's aware of those kind of, in the same way that he researches other communities, hippie communities, in the same way that he studied music. He studied image as well. And he knew what he was doing when he said, am I black or white? Am I straight or gay? He was welcoming a bigger crowd. He knew what he was doing when he was saying during emancipation, I don't know what the gender of that symbol is. Like what we would call, in my community, would be called queer in the pitch. But what you would just call is going, oh, anything goes is the real, would be most people's term of it. It's like, oh, I wear my girlfriend's clothes. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a kind of mark of a very secure person that doesn't feel feminized by wearing feminized clothes. And that in itself is an incredibly powerful message, because it's liberating for a great number of people.
I would kind of flip what you just said there, actually. You said not feeling feminized by wearing feminine clothes. I would actually say that he wasn't demasculinized. Is that a word?
That's actually a much better way of putting it, actually. Yeah. Yeah, that's a much better way of putting it, actually, Leah. That his masculinity wasn't reliant on very surface things. It was a core security.
Yeah. And I think as well, it's important to think about that in the place of where he grew up and the community that he came from. And Prince did this as like a black man from Minneapolis. And, you know, like that in itself, the way that he had that, you know, like the self-assuredness, the confidence, I think it's just like, it goes back to, like, you know, like the balls, the kind of audacity to walk out on stage or walk out, you know, like down the road in Minneapolis and do these things and allow others, give others the permission to express themselves and you know, like without labels, but just to have that, you know, like I always think of, you know, like the quote from Janelle Monáe, of being like a free ass mother effer. And that's like, I think of that, of Prince as the kind of epitome of that, of just having that self-assured control of himself. And I think it is really, really, really powerful. And we look now, and, you know, like we look at people like, you know, like Lil Nas X and, you know, like performers that are within the queer community that, you know, like Frank Ocean in particular as well. These performers, they look to Prince for that what we spoke about before, like when we were younger and we needed that kind of permission to be who we wanted to be. And regardless of Prince's sexuality, it doesn't matter. Like that queerness, and, you know, like we can have another but that queerness it's not about who you sleep with. It's that defiance and that F you to the society and the all the bullshit that goes around us, and him actually saying, do you know what, like, I'm going to do what I do, and just because I'm wearing my lover's blouse, or, you know, like I love lace, and you know, like I drape my bedrooms, and it doesn't mean I'm this or I'm that. It just means that I'm a free ass. Do you know what I mean? And I think
absolutely, to have
such power, like to have, like, I just think that to me is like Prince's like gift to fandom, that power that you can have in yourself to just be like, do you know what, like. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, you know, like an outlandish expression of self through fashion or anything. It could be the way that you know, like conduct yourself, or, you know, whatever it is. But there's that power that comes in, like, it's so hard to describe though, isn't it? It's just
the confidence as well, isn't it? To just do that.
I think I used to dress really outlandishly, like when I was a teenager, and then I learned to internalize that because it was such an outward expression of, I felt where I was a very impressive place. It was very, you know, on many levels. So kind of I dressed to kind of, you know, for want of a better phrase, to be a free ass, you know, in that way. But I learned to internalize it. I mean, but, you know, the language of image remains once you've done it. Like, you're never totally unconscious of the signals that you're sending out. But I think he's somebody, you know, because he was on the stage, he never left it on the stage. There's lots of people, like there's pictures of Alice Cooper, you know, on the golf course.
David Bowie
and David Bowie in the normal clothes, but this is not a guy that left it on the stage. That was as much that, you know, there's plenty of pictures of him walking through the airport with the same trousers he had on, you know, on stage in Paris.
Or riding his bike around Minneapolis.
Yeah, in the same outfit that he just did an after show in, you know, like, so, you know.
And I think that goes back to, like, you know, like these costumes aren't costumes, they're clothes. They're Prince's everyday clothes.
Well,
and
there's that brilliant story, isn't there, from way back in the day when he kind of first was up and coming and had made one or two appearances, and he was walking down the street and he heard someone say, "Is that Prince?" to their friend, like, "Is that Prince?" And apparently that person said, "No, that's not Prince. Prince would never wear that." And he heard that, and apparently he said, "That will never happen again." And from then on, it was like, okay, I have to live this.
Yeah, it's living the, not that it's living the act, isn't it? It's the continued perception of who you are and your identity.
Yeah, like goes back to what I was saying about, like Dieter Von Teese, like he made that existence for himself, like he had these creatives that were making his wardrobe the fantasy that he wanted it to be. And whilst he might have, like a slightly less sparkly or less skin tight variation of a costume, it's still the same silhouette. It's still saying the same things. And I lost my train of thought there, but
I also wonder if it's something of a generational thing as well, because if you look at like the 380s icons, Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, all three of them are people that are pretty much, like you see footage of Michael Jackson hanging around, he's still kind of got the loafers on. There's still, there's still the Jackson family fake military academy wear. And there's, and Madonna's never not in, well, I suppose that's actually not true. She's like in sportswear somewhere, but like a lot of them are just like 24 hours a day aware of, and I wonder if it's that kind of, they're informed by that old Hollywood mystique still. They're the people that deconstructed that kind of mystique, but they're still influenced by it, so they can't truly be free of it themselves.
And understand the importance of it as well.
Oh yeah.
I think I remember it was like a couple of years ago, I spoke to Chaz Smith about it, and he was saying that when Prince was about 13, he got his like friends that were girls in school to make him and his band matching coordinating suits. And to have that way of thinking when you're that young, that's telling the type of person you're talking. So even if Prince wasn't, if Prince's life worked out differently and he didn't become, like the Prince that we know now, you can still bet that Prince would be walking about in some variation of the way that he dresses.
Yeah.
That he dressed. That way, like there's that like not like effortlessness.
Yeah.
And I think because he was growing up and he was going to, like he was playing in bands at a young age, like being in the way and surrounded by performers and these Black musicians that were building him up and, like they were mentors to him. They were teaching him the importance of dress just as much as his dad and his mum were. And you see that in, like the Beautiful Ones, and Prince like remembers like the shark skin collars, the arrowhead like these are like again, like these are like really specific things that unless you have that interest, it doesn't even, a lot of people like look at a dress and they're like, oh, it's a dress. Do you know what I mean? But Prince's, like there's people that, like I've spoke to, and Prince would comment about their heels, like every time when they were wearing a specific heel, and not in like a sexualized way, just like, that's a really beautiful heel. It looks great on you. I love that with it. Like, and like, and then running out and buying his own pair, like that. That and that can't be replicated, and it can't be like and the kind of pop star making, like Svengali, like Prince, that comes from something within. And I think that's why Prince is so successful in his sartorial legacy, in his fashion legacy, as much as he is in his creative and musical legacy, because it's left that much of an impact. And I think the more people start to, like every year we see, like more and more people waking up to the idea that, like in the UK press as well, you still read stuff that, you know, like homophobic stuff about Prince. You still read horrific stuff. But every year it changes, and people begin to realise the real impact that he has had on, like we've been speaking about, not just music, but, you know, like graphic design, like menswear, body grooming, dance, like blah blah blah. It goes on, and I think that's why Prince has such like a flourishing academic community, because there's people out there that are like digging into stuff that is just, I mean, I obviously love Prince's music, but I'm not like I used to play the trumpet very badly, as I told Leah a wee while ago, but I'm not like a musical person. But I'll go to these conferences and I'll read papers, and it's fascinating, and that is like that. And people go into, you know, like there's just so much that you can dig into, and that's like a true, like that shows the kind of power behind Prince and the real kind of lasting legacy that he will always leave, and it'll just continue to grow. I think I don't see it. Well, you know,
there's so many layers to deconstruct as well. There's so many layers.
I mean, I've written articles like 8,000 words on like the Muppet performance. You know, like it's so joyous to do that as well, because as a Prince, again, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but in me doing this, like I started doing this seriously just before Prince passed, and when I was at uni, I wanted to do it for my dissertation, and they weren't interested. They wanted something blah blah blah, slightly different. So I started doing it myself, and then when Prince passed, like it was almost like a kind of like cathartic process for me to dig deeper and to learn more about Prince through fashion, because I think second or intrinsic to music, that relationship was just as important to Prince as it was clocking in to the studio and things like that. And I think the more we learn about Prince and the way that he presented himself, the more we learn about Prince as a person. And to me, that's really exciting, because we don't know much. We're trying to like recreate an oral history, and we're trying to speak to these designers, and to me, that's really interesting, because they know all the little eccentricities of Prince that we don't necessarily. We know some of them, but there'll be loads more.
I said, like, some of the story, like a lot of people have been chasing stories from the bandmates, and you know what? I love those. I love them to death, and those oral histories are really important. But also, in kind of one of the things I really enjoyed was like Stacia telling her stories, especially about like, oh, that outfit was meant for Tommy Barbarella, but actually Prince saw it and was like, no, that's mine. You know, like, and like you say, I don't think anybody who has a wardrobe department built into their work environment can ever be considered anything other than really heavily involved in the image process. It's not something he's ever farming out to anybody else to just come up with things and sure, you choose, I'll wear. It was part of the walk around Paisley Park that he did, checking in on the engineer, making sure that the drums were, you know, like mic'd up right, then going upstairs, making sure that they were choosing the right fabrics and the right cut, then going down, making sure the video was edited properly. I mean, that's 3 dissertations right there.
Yeah. and that in itself as well is like jumping back to the people that he looked up to, because, you know, like Louis Wells and Bon Terry, they were working with Earth, Wind and Fire, and in the 1999 tour, they were in the hotel room having, you know, like a makeshift wardrobe department and touring with him and making the stuff. And Prince obviously saw that and knew that that's what Earth, Wind and Fire and these touring bands were doing. And was like, I want a little bit of that for myself. You know, like, you think of, like, you know, like the House of Gaga and, you know, like Janelle Monáe's Wonderland and things like imagine having a wardrobe department in your house. It's the most extreme, flamboyant, amazing thing you could do. But like you say, like, you don't just do that unless you understand the importance and you put a lot of reverence in that, and the creativity behind that. So hopefully we'll learn more about it. And I hope more people begin to speak up as well, because I know that a lot of the designers, like they're quite private and they want to keep it that way, which I completely respect. But I would love to just hear more of those stories, like you say, the oral histories, because I don't want to lose their voice. Do you know that way? Like, that legacy is so important. And we should be doing it with everybody as well, not just Prince. We should be doing it for Madonna. We should be doing it for Michael Jackson. We should be doing it for Janelle, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's important. These people, like, their roles within popular culture are massive.
I think that's a really kind of good wrap-up point for us, because we could talk about this for forever. But I think definitely PPUK will have to do some kind of campaign to see who we can get to talk about working with Prince on a fashion front. And maybe we might be able to make that connection happen, Cassie, maybe.
Yes.
Let's do the campaign big enough. If you see our tweet and we're just like, share this, we're looking for this person, please share it.
Did you work with Prince?
We need you. But yeah, so just to wrap things up, guys, get the book. It's called On His Royal Badness, The Life and Legacy of Prince's Fashion. It has a chapter on the chain hat. It has a chapter on the raspberry beret suit. It has a chapter on Prince's leg warmers in the 70s. So if you're into Prince's fashion, get
out
it.
Trousers.
Yes. We're holding it up to the camera like you can see it, but we all have ours. So make sure you go and get yours. Cassie, it's been amazing to have you on. Please come and join us again. It's been so much fun.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy. And I really, really enjoy speaking to like-minded Prince nerds. It's such a joy. It always, like, it sounds cheesy, but it kind of fills you up, that way. Like, you feel completely energized when you're in a space of like-minded Prince nuts. So I really, really appreciate you guys allowing me the space to chat with you about these things, and some really interesting things as well that I'm going to put research more into my PhD. So thank you so much.